Today, we're talking about one of the giants of Western thought, Socrates. This is a man who completely changed how we think, but whose life is a total mystery, and it all ends with him being sentenced to death just for his ideas. And right away, we hit this massive paradox. How do you become maybe the most influential thinker in history, but you never actually write anything down? It's a genuine historical puzzle, and as you'll see, the answer is way more complicated than you might think. So our first challenge is, well, trying to figure out who Socrates even was. And believe me, it's a huge challenge, because the man himself left behind literally zero clues. That's right, everything we have is secondhand. Just imagine trying to piece together someone's life, but your only sources are gushing reviews from their biggest fans and stories that were told years, sometimes decades after they died. That's the exact problem we have with Socrates. And this gets us right to the heart of what's known as the Socratic problem. Our main guys, Plato and Xenophon, they were his students. They absolutely adored him. So you have to ask, are we getting the real Socrates, or are we getting a version of him that's been put on a pedestal? And the later writers? They were pretty much working off of rumors. It means we're constantly trying to separate the man from the myth. But it's not just about what he wrote or didn't write. The whole popular image we have of him, the humble old philosopher, that's only a tiny piece of the story. The reality is actually way more surprising. We all have this picture in our heads, right? This kind of shabby, barefoot wise man wandering around. But the truth? He probably had a privileged, top-tier education. And far from being some frail old guy, Socrates was a tough-as-nails, decorated soldier. In fact, some historians even think that in his youth, he might have had this raw, magnetic look, kind of like a young Marlon Brando.
Yeah, really.
And his physical toughness was absolutely legendary. He was a hoplite, that's a heavy infantryman, which was a pretty elite role. He was fighting in major battles well into his 40s. He was famous for being able to march barefoot in the snow, and he even saved a young soldier in the middle of a battle and then refused to take the medal for bravery. This was not a guy you wanted to mess with. It's all right there in his name. Socrates literally translates to safe in strength. This wasn't just some thinker. The man was a force of nature. So how does this battle-hardened soldier become known as the gadfly of Athens? Basically, its most annoying pest. Well, it all comes down to his completely revolutionary way of arguing, a method that would make him famous and ultimately get him killed. So, what was his secret weapon? It was a technique we now call the Socratic method. The whole point wasn't to give people answers. Nope. The point was to ask question after question until people were forced to see the holes in their own arguments. Here's how it would go down. Socrates would walk up to some big-shot politician and ask, "So, what is justice?" And then, question by question, he would just pick apart the answer until it completely crumbled. The goal wasn't even to find a better answer. It was to get to this state of aporia, that brilliant, uncomfortable moment when you realize you don't really know what you thought you knew. For Socrates, that was where real wisdom began. And all of this questioning, all this intellectual sparring, it led him to his most famous conclusion. You know the one. True wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing just how little you actually know. But I mean, you can imagine how this went over in polite society. Publicly humiliating generals and politicians and the so-called wise men of the city. Yeah, that didn't exactly win him a lot of friends in high places. To them, he just seemed arrogant, a troublemaker. And eventually, all those enemies decided they'd had enough. They put him on trial. But this wasn't just about his annoying questions. You see, Athens was in the middle of a crisis, and the city was desperately looking for someone to blame. The timing for Socrates was just awful. Athens had just lost a long, brutal war. And to make matters worse, two of his most famous students, Alcibiades and Critias, turned out to be a notorious traitor and a vicious tyrant. So when democracy finally returned, people were angry, they were scared, and they were looking for scapegoats. And there was Socrates, the teacher of villains. He was the perfect target. So they hit him with the official charges: impiety, not respecting the gods, and corrupting the youth. Now, these might sound a little vague to us, but in a city that was terrified it was losing its way, these were incredibly serious, explosive accusations. So they put it to a vote, a jury of 500 citizens, and the verdict came back guilty. But look how close this was. He was convicted by just 60 votes. If only 31 people had voted the other way, he would have walked free. But then came the sentencing, and this is where the story takes a wild turn. After Socrates gets up to speak, they vote again, and this time, the vote for the death penalty is an absolute landslide. So what on earth did he say? Okay, get this. Instead of showing remorse or suggesting a reasonable punishment like being exiled, Socrates basically gets up and doubles down. He argues that for all his service to Athens, for being its gadfly, he shouldn't be punished at all. He should be rewarded with free meals for life paid for by the state. The jury was stunned. They saw it as the ultimate act of arrogance, and that moment, right there, sealed his fate. But his death, as dramatic as it was, wasn't the end of his story. In a way, it was the act that made him immortal. Even in his final days, he never wavered. His friends actually bribed the guards and had an escape all planned out. But he refused to go. He argued that he had agreed to live under the laws of Athens his whole life, and to run away now would betray every principle he ever stood for. By choosing to die rather than be silenced, Socrates became a martyr for free thought and for reason itself. His impact is just everywhere. The Socratic method is still a cornerstone of law and education. His ideas about morality and the soul deeply influenced religious thought for centuries. And his whole approach of rational, logical examination helped pave the way for the scientific method. He completely changed how we define the search for truth. And in the end, it really all boils down to this one powerful idea. For Socrates, the whole point of being alive was to constantly question, to examine, and to try and understand ourselves and the world around us. Which really leaves us with one final big question. Socrates believed that his mission to question everything was so critical that he was willing to die for it. It kind of makes you stop and think, doesn't it? In our world today, what ideas are so important that they're worth defending no matter the cost?